Oh wait, there's a new Johnny Harris. Yep, let's go. Let's fucking go, bro.
The world you live in today was sketched on paper by European men. Men who looked like me.
Okay.
Men who at first were just curious and adventurous, but soon whose motives morphed into an insatiable greed. A confidence that their way was better than everyone else's.
I don't know, we're gonna find out how CIA is.
This confidence led to arguably the most influential series of events in human history.
Okay.
At least the history that affects you and me.
Okay.
A 500-year project of moving people and weapons and germs and language and violence to every corner of our
Earth. My fucking
and in the
brain
process,
broke for a
gathering
second.
and taking home stuff to make them
also,
richer.
Justin
Metal,
is busted.
rubber, tea,
Come on, Yellow,
sugar,
Innocence,
and
Parkside
human
Swan,
bodies.
Roy
This
Storm,
isn't a history lesson.
Smoked,
You
Leon
won't hear me
Trotsky,
talk a lot about
Arcane,
dates
Julian.
and names. Instead, this is
Javi,
the first of
thank you,
3
guys.
videos where I want to show you how this happened. How Europe, a continent full of poor, miserable farmers, took over the entire world. And in the process, they shaped it. They shaped it to their way of thinking and speaking and doing things. So this is part 1 of how Europe stole the world.
Bro, what is this B-roll?
I am out here on a bit of an excursion near the sea, but I want to pause this video because I need to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, which is BetterHelp, a company that is trying to help you improve your mental health. I'm a giant fan of therapy. I've said it before.
Wait,
I work
what?
with people.
What's
Over
an
3 million
ad?
people on how Europe...
I'll blow my nose. I'll be right back.
Yes, I'm going to be looking at a lot of maps to understand this issue because drawing on the map is how they did things. To understand how Europe stole the world, we need to rewind to back when the map looked a little different. Hold on. Back in like 1450, the world map looked like this. I mean, Europe was just a bunch of smaller kingdoms. The borders look so different than they do today. They were all pretty small potatoes. Well, actually, there actually were no potatoes. Those wouldn't arrive to Europe for another 50 years. But the fact is, there wasn't an abundance of anything in Europe. Instead, Europeans were just farmers barely scraping by, constantly in debt to a few rich landlords.
True.
Life in Europe was scarce and miserable. Meanwhile, there was a bunch of other empires around the world that were thriving. There was this big empire over in the Middle East. They had silk, and then over here in India, you had a big empire with spices and luxurious cotton fabrics. Then, of course, there was the big dynasty in China that had by this time already invented...
Wait. Whoa, Johnny, do you not remember like a video ago when you said China was never this big? Huh? Don't you remember, Johnny? Like a video ago when you never showed China this big and said it wasn't united, you dumbass?
Gunpowder, porcelain, and really sophisticated ships that they could use to sail around the world. Oh, and all of these empires were trading with one another, making all of them even richer. They all had better everything than Europe did. And
But that's not true, though. Wait, that's literally not true. How do you think Europe became so disconnected and like feudalism lasted for so long? Europe had an abundance of a lot of things, especially like certain agricultural animals and fuck, I'm trying to think of the name of it. I can't think of the name of it right now. Like agriculture animals and like certain crops and shit. We had things. No gold.
And miserable
Bitch, gold don't
Europeans
matter.
eventually wanted in on all the trade. So that's kind of the context here that sets the stage for Europe taking over the world.
There's really good land in Europe. It's very easy to grow in Europe. There you go.
The first 2 countries that wanted in on all this trade and set out to explore were the countries that today we know as Spain and Portugal. So they start looking for a land route to get
obviously
them
like Greece.
east. They start
maybe.
moving east, and nope, Oh look, it's the Ottoman Empire, a very powerful Middle Eastern empire that's run by Muslims. Meanwhile, Spain and Portugal are hella Catholic, and they're not being super nice to Muslims or Jews, so the Ottomans are like, no, we're not gonna let you pass through our land to get in on the trade in the East. Oh, and by the way, you can't even afford our taxes. You're miserable Europeans without a lot of money, so go away. They're gonna need another way to go east.
Rolled.
Portugal's workaround was literally to go around the continent of Africa, stopping along the coast to trade with the wealthy African empires along the way. This is a huge moment because it actually worked. It's near the end of the 1400s, and the Portuguese are now going nuts. They're sending ships around this route that they figured out, trading with the East. And suddenly the Portuguese are dressing in luxurious fabrics. They're using cloves and cinnamon and black pepper to make their food actually taste good. Wait a minute, you're telling me they didn't have black pepper before this? Jeez, miserable indeed.
You must have some papers.
So the age of exploration has begun. Miserable Europe is doing something about their situation, going out to get in on the thriving trade in the East. But remember, this isn't about conquering land. It's about trading. For now.
Oh. Okay. I'll take that.
Okay, so now Spain sees Portugal hitting the jackpot, and
they probably didn't want to conquer at first because you don't know how strong the empire is, but once they find out you're a weak-ass empire with just like good resources, yeah.
I'll take jelly. They want in on this too.
You're not gonna just like show up and be like, yo, mine now. You're gonna like put feelers out there, you know?
To establish their own trade route to Asia. But they wanted to do things a little bit differently. Instead of following Portugal's lead and going around Africa, they listened to a pitch from this Italian sailor. And this sailor wants them to fund his new startup called What If We Sailed West to Get to Asia instead of East? Super promising name. Now remember, at this point, people in Europe thought that the world looked like this. The logic was like, oh, we can just hop over to Asia by going this other way. So Spain was like, yes, great idea, high risk, high return, do it, Columbus.
Yep.
Well, it turns out the world does not look like this. And instead, over here, there are a couple of massive continents that Columbus ran into. But like many of us confident white dudes, Columbus was like, yeah, I know exactly where I am. We're like in the Indies right now. Like over those guys over there, those are Indians. Yep, I can feel it. But instead, he was like in Cuba. But despite the mansplaining, Columbus kind of found exactly what he was looking for and more. Great empires with rich culture and food and precious metal that weren't available to him back home. He was right on target. So he's like, all right, guys, let's trade. But then he's like, wait a minute. These people don't have armies or navies protecting their stuff. So this must be kind of a different place. Different land with different rules. And this is where the biggest light bulb moment of the century goes off in this guy's head. Change of plans, boys, says Columbus.
Genocide
We're going to claim this land.
Yeah, Guns, Germs, and Steel. It's a very good book.
And everyone was like, wait, what? You heard me. We are claiming this land. And the boys are like, wait, weren't we here to like trade with great empires? Portugal's been doing this for like all these years and getting rich. And he's like, no, they don't have armies. They're just letting us show up and like be here without a fight. So obviously that means they don't mind if we just like claim the land. I mean, I'm taking some creative liberty here on like explaining what Columbus was thinking, but like, look at the letter that he wrote.
Why did you?
Here's the letter that.
Dog. What a waste of paper. Bro, just get an iPad. You could have saved so much time. Just get a fucking iPad, dog.
That Columbus wrote back to the king and queen, reporting on what he saw. He writes back saying that he discovered many islands inhabited by numerous peoples, and then I took possession of them for our most fortunate king, making public proclamation and unfurling his standard,
Props make
his
better
flag,
videos, true.
with no one making any resistance.
Yeah, Telestra.
No one making any resistance. Spain and Portugal set out to trade. They set out to like explore.
That is unironically, that is true at the beginning. When the first places they land, they thought the Spanish were coming to or they were like saviors of some sort. It wasn't until they, I think, hit Latin America, like South America, that they started resistance, or there was resistance.
Understand and get in on the global economy.
They thought they were
but
gods.
Columbus's
Some,
realization
but not all civilizations.
was
Only
instead
some.
of trading, they could actually just claim land for
I mean, that's why they didn't genocide them like the British did when they landed in America.
themselves. And this changed everything. After all, no one was making any resistance. This moment is the foundation upon which all European imperialism grows. I'll show you.
They just thought they were very wealthy.
It's the moment that would give us the first big division in the minds of Europeans, the thing we wrote on paper, the old world versus the new world. This is really familiar language to us now, but it was invented in this moment. The new world was now seen as land that could be claimed. It was fair game to go conquer because they
Columbus genocided many groups. Yeah, of course. He'll get to that. Trust me.
didn't have big armies or a Christian king. Forget trade with the East, said Columbus. There's a bunch of land that we can go take over in the West. And the race was on.
Yep. Yeah, Leon, exactly. I mean, this, okay, listen, to be fair, if you've read Latin American, or not even Latin, like Spanish history, dude, the Spanish were so good at politics. They were really good at bureaucracy, like very good at it. Actually, I would argue that Spanish invented modern bureaucracy, right? Like that they like invented, like they built systems that are ingrained, right? Different than just being headed by like a royal family or like pretty surface level things. They built entire systems that all held each other up, right? Like a foundation. They had like that's like the first place you have to go, oh, you have to get this approved, and it gets stamped, and then that goes to someone else, right? And they did this to make the system part of everything, right? So what happened is when the Spanish came to Latin America, they promised different natives that they would help them fight against their enemies, or they would pit them against themselves on purpose. So what they did is like when they landed in, I think he's talking about when they landed in like Cuba right now or some shit, or like some island over there. The idea was to fight like the next nearest natives. But when the Spanish ended up in South America, they made like the Incans wipe out everybody because the Incans fucking were like the big dog. The Incans were like the big dog. So they just like befriended the Incans and were like, yo, listen, we'll hook you up. Just like go fight these people. We got your back, bro. And then they told the other people, hey, man, like the Incans are kind of assholes. Like, they need to be fought. So then after the war, whenever they think, they're like, hey, we'll come in and rebuild. So what they did is they came in and just like had a lot of kids and assimilated culture. And so then they like, you can't kick out the Spanish. Once they realize the Spanish are evil and are like killing people and genociding, they're like, well, shit, we can't kick you out. Like, that's the dad of my son, you know? My son is half Spanish now. Oh, shit. Like, it became really hard. And that spread, that was like, they realized it worked. Yeah, but later they replaced mixed race elites with peninsulares. I mean, they have an entire caste system, right? Yeah, they had like the mestizos. They had a bunch of them. The mestizos was like the most popular, right? But they had an entire caste system. But it was another way they just built the systems out. They built the systems that way.
Spain and Portugal didn't want to fight with each other over all this land,
I mean, we still see that today, by the way. Like, in Mexico, if you look at like most bureaucrats in Mexico today, they're light skinned, like very white, or they're you know, like they have mostly European blood. You can just tell. Yep.
Quest that they were about to undertake. So they got together and they drew some lines.
Yeah, Andre?
No, literally, they just drew two straight lines. We have Africa, we have Europe, and then we have this line. Everything left of this line is Spain's. Everything to the right is Portugal. This is literally one of the original maps where they actually drew these straight lines and divided the world into two. But let's look at this on a nicer looking map, please. There we go. Now we can see very clearly. Oh look, now we understand why they speak Portuguese in Brazil. So Spain and Portugal now have their spheres of the world that they can go conquer. They didn't ask anyone, they didn't negotiate with the locals, they just drew these straight lines. The Pope actually helped them broker the deal. Classic. But again, this is a huge thing that I want to explain in this series, that these were not just lines. They weren't just like lines on paper. They were actually a shift in the paradigm, a new way of thinking about the world. No one making any resistance.
Yep.
It was a story
Spamtana.
that Europeans could...
Exactly. Yeah, Spamtana, exactly. I mean, I always suggest people read Jose Marti to like understand the dynamic of like Latin America and like the appreciation they have for culture and how lines were created to is that like these country lines should never have existed, and it should just be cultural recognition. Like you can recognize the territory your culture is from without having lines.
could now tell themselves old world versus new world, claimed versus unclaimed, a new way of thinking. Think I'm being overly simplistic about this?
Underdogs.
Let me show you
good,
something.
But Underdogs is about the Mexican Revolution. I talked about that on stream. Underdogs is like a fictional story about God, what the fuck is his name? I can't remember the main character, but I remember what he looks like. He's like a big burly like Mexican guy, and he's like stuck in the ravine fighting off the federales. Yeah, very good. Super good book.
1, 2, 3, 4. These were a juicy find.
Dude, Johnny Harris and his fucking maps.
I found this amazing Portuguese nautical atlas. It's a bunch of maps that the Portuguese Navy drafted up right after these two lines divided the world between Spain and Portugal. And it is an amazing series of maps, but not only because it's visually stunning,
Yeah, Demetrio maybe? I can't
but
remember.
also because it lets us into the mind of how the Portuguese saw the world after they divided it with Spain. This atlas reads like a storybook. It's like the Portuguese were so giddy about giving themselves permission to steal half the world that they had to write a children's story about it. That's what it feels like. That's not what it is. But just look at this thing. Here's the title page. You can see that at the center is the sphere that was given to Portuguese. Brazil, Africa, what is now the East Indies. And here on every corner, you see these angels that are blowing wind into the sails of the Portuguese who are out on their land grab mission.
Huh.
So this is just the title page. The subsequent pages of this atlas are close-ups on different regions. This is the Caribbean over here, look. This will become Cuba, this will become Haiti, Dominican Republic, North America, South America, all of this unclaimed, up for grabs. Here, our story depicts all these flags. Some of them are Spanish flags on the islands on their side of the line, but then you have Portuguese flags on the Portuguese side of the line. The status of this land, according to the fantasy of the Portuguese, changing from unclaimed to claimed by men on ships with Christian crosses on their sails, showing up and planting flags. This was like playing a board game to them. Here's another page. This one's a close-up on Brazil. And look, we've got people over here. We've got dark-skinned, naked people with primitive tools and no homes. It looks like down here in Brazil, they spend their days chopping wood naked and dancing, all while being gazed upon by fantastical birds and dragons? This was an official naval atlas drafted for the king, and if its message wasn't clear enough on how these people should be depicted, the atlas has a little info box up here where they say that the Brazilians are, quote, savage and very brutal.
Cheers, birthday.
This is one of the first atlases ever made, and it wasn't really a navigation tool. It was much more a declaration of a new way of seeing the world. Unclaimed territory, subhuman people, all of it up for grabs by Christian boats. So yeah, this is how it all started. Under this new paradigm, both empires expanded very quickly, forcing the Spanish and Portuguese languages across the ocean, mining vast quantities of silver, creating plantations for tobacco and sugar, and in the process massacring the people who were living in this new world, both with their weapons, but also with their European city germs that the people being conquered didn't have immunity to. I mean, this whole thing started with curiosity.
Oh yeah, thanks for all this up. Wait, let me just finish
Curiosity,
this.
with a
I'll read off
thirst
subs.
to get in on the trade in Asia. But soon, as this fantasy of unclaimed land came into the picture, the goal shifted, the project pivoted, and soon Europe was telling themselves a new story, that they, enlightened Christians, were entitled to claim it. And while this story starts with Spain and Portugal, soon it spread. Other European countries poked their head up from their farm work and said, hey, we're white Christians also. We know how to sail. We want in on this story of unclaimed land. And that's the next chapter of the story.
Thank you.
One that I will tell you in the next part.
This is okay. It was a boring Johnny Harris video. It really was. It wasn't that great. Okay, I'm gonna grab something because